So that's Patti LaBelle's song, New Attitude. Michael kept asking me for a talk title for this week, and the focus for this week is the power of the mind to create the kind of life we love to live. And of course you end up here on a day of creativity, and of course you end up here on a day when you get invited to be challenged because you've said how creativity is not you. There's creativity, and then there's us, and that those are separate things. However, I think what the point that Ernest Holmes was making with the notion of the creative power of the mind is that we are constantly creating. That it's just inherent. We can't help but do it. So you described how you have created an intention that as long as Sassy is around, that you will be around. And that intention is pulling you forward. We set intentions in our lives to do all sorts of things. Sometimes our intentions are very conscious and very deliberate. Sometimes we wake up and realize that we've had an intention and we never knew that we had said it. Sometimes we're on autopilot. So the first thing that I really want to talk about is the notion of our attitude. Now, I don't know about you, but I know that I've heard the expression, he's given me attitude. Or, what an attitude that person seems to have. Or, I just don't have very good attitude about these things. So, attitude can reflect a way of being towards the world. You know, oftentimes they'll talk about a teenager's attitude. That adolescents just automatically put on attitude. And part of putting on attitude is the ability to separate. It's the ability to become independent. And sometimes you can't be independent unless somebody says this and you're going to say that. You identified a particular political candidate who will say one thing, and it's almost impossible not to have a reaction that's completely the opposite. You know, at least for me, I find that when that particular candidate speaks to the notion that, well, we should exclude and send these people back, and no people should ever be welcomed here. My reaction to that is what many of the principles of the United States that I understood were founded on, that France gave us the Statue of Liberty as an icon welcoming people to Staten Island, that it wasn't simply it was a home where send me your refugees. Send me the people that are in need. And wave after wave after wave of people have come to this country and have created a new life for themselves. And the story that we haven't often told with that is the attitude of, we did not give all that much care to the people who already lived here. There were people for whom this was already a sacred nation, for whom there were many sacred nations, and we come in and we're like, I'll trade you these beads for this land. And the attitude of, can I take advantage of this? So I think a lot of times our attitude directs how we go and where we go and the way that we behave. Attitude can orient us. So the invitation with today's talk is, how do we very consciously construct our attitude rather than just fall into old routines? So I'm going to give 3 suggestions for attitude adjustments. And I'll focus on each one of them. But the first one that we're going to talk about a little bit is the notion of identifying what's important. The second idea that's important is the power of community. And the third idea is about taking responsibility. So 3 things to support a conscious attitude. Everything's important, the value of community, and taking responsibility. So, this notion of everything's important. Some of the ideas for this week's talk that people across the Centers for Spiritual Living are talking about came from Viktor Frankl. Viktor Frankl was a Jewish man who was taken into the Nazi death camps, and he survived it, and he wrote about it. His experience can kind of capture what I think is also captured in that song. That we get so fixated on what we want in our lives. Sometimes it's not until it's all stripped away that we really see what's of value. So what he described, among many of the things he described, he noted how in the midst of just these horrible circumstances where he had a life and that life was just stolen away, and people stood by and could let it happen. Some people took direction and just made it happen. Some people passively let it happen. And in the midst of having nothing, one of the ways that he survived was by recognizing that they could not steal from him his attitude. His attitude remained his no matter what was done to him, no matter what happened around him. So the trick that he found to adjust his own attitude was to recognize what was important. He had his memories of his wife. He wasn't in camp with her because they had been separated. They didn't let families stay together in death camps. You know, the men were taken to one place, the women were taken to another place. And they didn't know what was going on for each other. One of the ways that he coped was he would just hold images of his beloved. And sometimes those things that happen on a daily basis that we take for granted, he described how it was just holding and contemplating his beloved that enabled him to find beauty, that enabled him to find goodness, that enabled him to find peace. In the midst of people ordering them to walk barefooted in freezing temperatures, barefooted in the snow, having to carry things, having to work as slaves. He could have succumbed to incredible bitterness. I don't know about either of you, but I know that there have definitely been times in my life when I have succumbed to bitterness. I remember specifically when I was in the midst of my first bout of kidney failure. And I wasn't yet on dialysis. I was on a waiting list for a kidney. I had a headache every day. And my diet, which had already been constrained with diabetes, had been narrowed down even further, that I could really only eat a couple of white foods. I could eat puffed rice, I could eat plain rice, I could eat rice cakes. I had very low protein that I could have. So it was very boring. And no matter what I did, it didn't make a difference in terms of how I felt. So I'm following these directions for what I should do. Couldn't eat carrots because there's too much potassium in carrots. Couldn't eat any fruit or vegetables because there's too many vitamins in there and my kidneys couldn't process them. My life seemed very shut down. And this was also at a time when I was in the process of my ex-wife was back together with a person that she really loved. And I just felt really on the outs. I felt really alone. So I felt like my relationship was no longer, my significant relationship was no longer present. I felt like my body was no longer in support of me. I was on this wait list, and the word on the wait list is, it's a long time. So I remember being very vehemently thinking, you know, when they talk about the story of Jesus, he died on a cross in 3 hours. It was all done in 3 hours. Yeah, I had a little bit of torture before that, but it was done and over with. And here I am, day in and day out, this constant unpleasantness. And I felt really sorry for myself. Now, I can tell you that that attitude did not afford me very much. It did not establish a sense of energy. It did not establish a sense of power. It did not establish a sense of movement. So I speak from a place of knowledge. I'm not saying there are better attitudes because I'm on the Pollyanna joy and sunshine. I'm speaking from the actual experience that attitude, that negative attitude, that my life is the worst, really wasn't a helpful attitude. I remember thinking very clearly, there's the story of George Bailey in It's a Wonderful Life. And George was quite assured in that film that everyone would be better off without him. And I could so identify with that if I just had not ever existed, that the world would be a better place. Now, if you know the story of It's a Wonderful Life, George is given the opportunity to see what life would have been like without him. And he is startled into recognizing how significant he is. And that's where we come to that second point around community. So, the first point around everything's important. Our attitude is amazingly important. And what we pay attention to is amazingly important. As long as I was only paying attention to what I could eat, and what my head felt like, and what was going on with my relationship, and me. Let me tell you a little more about me. As long as that was it, I was not seeing anything that was important. I was turning myself into this huge martyr. I was making myself into importance by virtue of everything that I didn't have. The encouragement is there are other things that we can do. There are other ways to be. So the second thing is around community. I had disconnected myself from community. I didn't really see where I could fit in. I didn't know what I had to offer. How often do we feel like, well, what difference do I make? In that story of George Bailey, what he saw was that his presence made a difference in so many lives and in so many outcomes. Sometimes our presence isn't about having done a huge thing. George contrasted himself with his brother who saved a whole squadron of people. But when George went back, George just saved his brother from drowning. And it didn't seem like a big deal. You know, it was a big deal in the family, but it wasn't the same breadth and the same scope as what his brother had done to save a whole airship, a whole ship of men beneath his command. Oftentimes, one of the things that happens is, in community, we make comparisons. What they're doing is so much more. What they're doing is so much more greater value. The trick with community is just to find that we have some place, somewhere. And we bring to that community whatever it is that we have to bring. Perhaps it's just a listening presence. And I use the just in quotes. Think about the difference that reading with the kindergartners makes. Someone has had attention paid to them that would not have happened under any other circumstances. The engagement in community is something that happens, and it's how we pay attention to it, recognizing its own importance. So, one of the things, you know that I've got my little Fitbit. One of the things I have found with my little Fitbit is that it's generated an odd little community for me. I have somebody that invites me to, for instance, a daily challenge, and suddenly I am thinking about every step I'm taking. I'm thinking about the other people that are in that challenge with me. So what are their steps like during the course of the day? How is it that they are at meeting their goals, at sustaining their well-being? So community can come through all sorts of things. It can be very conscious. It can be somewhat passive. I mean, keeping track of my steps is not a big deal. It's something that this is doing automatically. But it's sending this information to other people. I had one person tell me, you know, you really do a lot of steps. And I worried. I thought, well, maybe I'm setting up the situation so that people are going to feel like there's something wrong. And the person actually said to me, no, in fact, you are like the step inspiration for my son. You know, me and my husband and my son, we would probably sit around all day long. But Nige sees your steps and he's like, I gotta get moving. That Vaughan guy, he's got all kinds of steps. How is he doing that? So, in a very unconscious way, it's not like I wake up in the morning and I'm like, I am going to do a bunch of steps so that I can inspire other people to do steps. But it may have that effect. There are all kinds of ways that our actions, our contributions to communities make a difference. We may be able to name it, and there are times that we may not be able to name it. The fact is that by merely making ourselves available to communities, that opens up that possibility. And with that comes that attitude of, I have a place where I belong. Barry, you have a place of belonging with your neighbor who is delighted when you are gone and they get to walk Sassy. There is something that person gains that they would not gain if you and Sassy weren't there. The notion that we are forming community is just how we're built. It's how we're designed. Human beings are naturally from community. So it isn't something that has to be a struggle. It isn't something that has to be, how am I going to do this? It's just stepping forward. And stepping forward leads us to that last point, taking responsibility. Now sometimes that can feel like a huge weight, like a huge burden. That notion, I do not want any more responsibility. I think that happens with our tendency to make extremes. In the song A New Attitude, Patti LaBelle talks about too hot, too cold, too high, too low. she talks about those extremes that we're likely to engage in. We can have that orientation towards our responsibilities. We can see it as too much, as too big a burden, as more than we can handle. We can see our responsibilities as these insurmountable tasks. I know both of you have seen Mount Rainier. So you see Mount Rainier. If we thought we had the responsibility to climb to the top of Mount Rainier, it could be, I don't think either of you are mountain climbers, it could be a daunting, overwhelming task. Just seeing that mountain could establish a sense of just overwhelm and dread. The alternative is to look with awe. And I've talked about awe before as a spiritual practice. I'm just wanting to link that notion of awe to the notion of responsibility. To be able to say, I have the ability to respond. Isn't that awesome? Isn't that powerful? Isn't that amazing that the ability to respond comes through me? That I am a place through which response can happen. And with that ability for response to action, we're in a better position to take action. The nature of that action is whatever we set our mind and our attitude on. We get to choose that. There's nothing that tells us it has to be a certain way. Now, yes, there are lots of stories that have informed us, and we can choose how to move forward. I've recently started rewatching a show called Fringe. And in this story called Fringe, it has all kinds of paranormal activity and all kinds of things that are strange and amazing and terrifying. But the real core of the story is about relationships. It's about this woman who is the hero, and she comes to a situation where she can't do something. She can't respond to what is needed. And with some research, she finds someone who she thinks might be able to respond. It's this guy named Walter Bishop, and he's got a huge IQ, and he's amazingly bright, but the problem is that he's locked away in an insane asylum. And the only one who can get the father out of the insane asylum is his son, from whom he has been estranged. He has not seen his son in 18 years. Those are the three main characters. Now, what an interesting bunch. This woman hero, this insane, brilliant guy, and his son, who's also a genius as well. At the very onset of the show, the son, who's been estranged from his father, has very little patience. He has lots of negative attitude. The father's first words after seeing his son in 18 years is, "You're not as fat as I thought you'd be." I say this because a lot of times we find ourselves in situations where things seem quirky like that. And I think the power of the story is that she, the hero, is inspired and inspires the scientist to figure things out in a new way. And the son is really able to interpret for him. But he's got an attitude. And she, being an outsider, can make a reflection on that attitude. I describe these because I think of them as internal characters. I think we all have our own internal hero. I think we all have our own internal genius who knows how to make things work, but might not always make it work in the best way. Who might screw things up. And who can be estranged from that inner child. That inner child who can sometimes be a little bit whiny, who can sometimes be complaining about how unfair things are. And yet, when that inner child sees what the hero needs, the inner child will come to the hero's defense and will come to the hero's aid. Inside of us, we have everything we need. Spirit is right there in us, as us, through us. So, in order to change our attitudes, the invitation is to see what's important. The hero could see that she couldn't do it all herself, and that she needed the help of someone who could see it in a bigger way and in a way that was beyond her imagination. In a way that people thought is crazy. There's a part of us that is crazy. It's that capacity to see things in a way that nobody else can see. So call our own inner hero important. Call our own crazy, fresh ideas. Oh my gosh, this is so beyond possible within. And the child who doesn't always get all the attention that they need, but who can grow into something more. That child inside is just as important as the genius inside, is just as important as the hero inside. And it's when all three come together that change can happen. That the attitude can be lifted. We've tidied up our point of view, and we've got a new attitude. And so it is.